Amendment proposed after Clause 126. Insert the new clause printed on the marshalled list.
I've added my name to this amendment 382F, an amendment that has been carefully and proportionally, I think, taken on tackling problems of the ever-growing number of overlapping acts and statutes that are used to limit free speech. If public order laws on protest are, to quote the Liberal Democrat benches from the other day, if protest laws are a confused mess, then I think the labyrinth patchwork affecting free speech is just an unpenetrable quagmire. And the noble Lord has done a real public service here by very carefully going through how inadvertently and often by mission creep, censorious laws undermine democratic speech rights and actually are damaging the UK's reputation internationally. Now, I'm not just talking about JD Vance or Elon Musk, who I know and I've heard commented on in this House as dismissed sneerily by many in Westminster as that's just Trumpist misinformation or hyperbole. But actually, I think we do need to recognise that even in the Bible of globalist liberalism, no less The Economist, they also, last May, featured a cover proclaiming Europe's free speech problem and identified the UK as one of the most censorious on the continent. And I think there's a lot of, they provided a lot of evidence, there's been lots of discussion all over the political spectrum in relation to that idea of 12,000 arrests a year, 30 a day for speech offences. That spring from laws this amendment seeks to rein in, but which this House is responsible for. And we're here talking about crime and policing, and the police are expected to treat speech offences as criminal acts, and the police are expected to police them. Since the introduction of hate crime laws, which, to remind you, and has been reminded, a relatively recent concept popularised from the mid-1980s, the legislative and regulatory implications of restricting hate and words that are said to have caused distress have proliferated, and it's grown into a real tangle of tripwires. And in such a tangle of tripwires, many people in the police, the CPS, politicians, even they seem confused about what one can say legally and what's verboten. I'm sure my lords will remember the extraordinary story of the Times radio producer Maxie Allen and his partner Rosalind Levine. They were the couple who were arrested by 6 uniformed officers in front of their young children for posting disparaging messages about their daughter's school in a private WhatsApp group. It received a lot of publicity, and they've just been paid, in fact, £20,000 for wrongful arrest, although they haven't received an apology. But what stood out from me about that story was that Miss Levine, when the police officers went into her house, asked what malicious communication offence they were being accused of, and the detective didn't know and had to Google and then kind of read out what Google said. Now, that strikes me as not healthy. So I think that we as legislators have a responsibility to tackle this. Too often we just pass more and more laws, more restrictions on freedom, and never stop to look if there's anything on the statute books that can be repealed, streamlined, rolled back. So I commend the noble Lord, Lord Moynihan of Chelsea, for his detailed, well-thought-out, proportionate attempt at tackling the way the law has just grown and the negative impact it's having on democratic free speech. But I also want to commend the noble Lord for his courage on taking on this issue, because as we know, and he's referenced this, anyone taking on hate speech laws, I mean, when he told me he was doing it, I did gulp, I have to say. Actually, you just think, oh my goodness, he's going to be accused of all sorts of things. He's going to be accused of being a bigot. It's a risk. And it's horrible to be accused of being a racist or a misogynist or homophobic or a hate monger or what have you. But that's the very point. Being accused of being pro-hate speech, if you oppose hate speech legislation, is itself a silencing of a democratic discussion on laws. And we as legislators should not be bullied or silenced in that way. And ironically, the best tool for any cultural shift in relation to prejudice, in my view, is free speech. To be able to take on bigotry, we need to be able to expose it, argue against it, use the disinfectant, in fact, of free speech to get rid of the hate, whereas censorship via hate speech laws doesn't eliminate or defeat regressive ideas, it just drives them underground to fester unchallenged. So the noble Lord, Lord Moynihan, has laid out the key legal problems, I think, in his approach to it, especially in relation to the lack of precision in terminology used across speech-restricting laws, and I think he's raised a lot of real food for thought there. Perhaps I can just add a concern from a slightly different perspective to avoid repeating the points he's made. For me, there's another cost when law fails to clearly define concepts such as abusive words, insulting words, grossly offensive speech, what causes annoyance, inconvenience and needless anxiety, all these things littered all over the law. And that is the dangerously elastic framing of what speech constitutes harm or indeed hate has been deeply regressive in terms of its impact on our cultural norms. There's been a sort of cultural mission creep, which has especially undermined new generations of young people's resilience. The language of hate speech legislation now trips off the tongues of sixth formers in schools, university campus activists, when they complain that they disagree with or feel made to feel uncomfortable by a speaker or a lecturer, and they say that they should be banned or that their views, they will quote things like, "That lecturer has caused me harassment, alarm and distress," straight out the law. It's like, where did you get that from? They'll say that those words are perceived as harmful, and if they hear them, it will trigger anxiety, even post-traumatic stress disorder is fashionable. It's because we've socialised the young into the world of believing that speech is a danger to their mental well-being, and this has cultivated a grievance victimhood. And it's a sort of circular firing squad, because then the young, who feel very frightened by words, which they've kind of picked up and imbued from the way the law operates, then demand even more lawfare to protect themselves and their feelings from further distress. And that, they're even encouraged, and they go around taking screenshots of private messages, which they take to the police, or scrolling through people they don't like's social media to see if there's anything they can use in the law. So I think that the law has enabled the emergence of a kind of thin-skinned approach to speech, and it's been institutionalised via our statute books. And the police don't seem immune to such interpretations of harmful words either, and can cause, I'm afraid, themselves to weaponise the power that they have by these, the kind of muddle that we have here. And I would say that it wastes police resources and energy, very pertinent to this bill. So just a couple of examples to finish. In August 2023, a 16-year-old autistic girl was arrested for reportedly telling a female police officer that she looked like her lesbian nana. Now, the teenager's mother explained that this was a literal observation, i.e. the police officer looked like her grandmother, her nana, who's a lesbian. But the officer understood it as homophobic abuse, so a Section 5 public order offence kicked in, and on the basis of causing alarm and distress using abusive language. But if you witness the film of the incident, 7 police officers entered the teenage girl's home with her hiding in the closet, screaming in fear, punching herself in the face, and you might be able to ask who was distressed in that instance. The girl was held in custody for 20 hours. Ultimately, no charges were brought. But surely we have to ask if the statute book has created such confused laws, whether the statute book has encouraged police overreach, whether the statute book encouraged that young police officer who heard somebody say lesbian nana and immediately thought, arrest her, hold her for 20 hours, say she's causing... I mean, what happened there to the instincts of a police officer? They think that would be the answer. Many I speak to about the problems addressed by this amendment, by the way, suggest that it's all a problem that's been overstated. They say, oh, the police are a bit too promiscuous in arresting people, maybe. But the numbers charged or convicted are fairly stable, in fact, in some instances going down. I was told that by one journalist recently. But as legislators, shouldn't we query whether this implies the laws are giving too much leeway to the police to follow up malicious, trivial and politicised complaints, creating a chilling consequence by the notion of process as punishment? And I do think that's, you know, you might not be charged, but you're arrested, and public law-abiding citizens are humiliated and embarrassed with the cops at the door. I think it's a good idea for us to take this amendment very seriously, and I hope the Minister will give us a positive response.